Keep getting asked for foundational recommendations for psychoanalysis. What should I read if I want to study psychoanalysis? Stop. I got you. Start with this book. This book is not going to give you any foundational theory, but rather it is going to expose you to real life cases that are very severe, that are almost on the borderline or really psychotic. People who have been hurt really badly in life, and how Annie G. Rogers goes about treating these people and how it has been shaped in their life through linguistics, through the symbolic register of language. And they really talk about the three registers of unconscious that Lacan explores in his interpretation of Freud, right? This is a great book to start if you don't want to be burdened by theory, but don't want to miss out on it either. This is really just that book. If I were to recommend the first book that somebody could read on psychoanalysis, it would be this one. Now, moving on, I would recommend you read Stephen Gross's The Examined Life. This is a great book. This also goes into cases, but not in so much depth or detail as Annie G. Rogers does. These cases are divided into chapters, and though they can be heart wrenching at times, they are expository of the classical rather than the Lacanian school of psychoanalysis, which some prefer, some don't prefer. I read both, right? The next book I recommend to anybody who wants to read Freud but don't know where to start because Freud is so dense to read. I get these complaints often that, oh my god, Freud is so difficult to go through, he's so difficult to read. Okay, read this. This is psychopathology of everyday life. Freud just goes on, applies his theory of the unconscious mind and how it is found functioning in the everyday life of a random human being, especially himself, like he does in the interpretation of dreams also. But this is not going to be about the id, ego, superego, unconscious, preconscious, conscious registers. This is more about slips of tongues, how we forget things, why we forget them, what comes to mind when we forget them, what we say out loud incorrectly, how things are condensed in our speech, which is something that Lacan really leverages in the future. But I won't be talking about Lacan in this video because Lacan is somebody rather advanced. You need a foundation reading of Freud before you get to Lacan, right? Now, next up is going to be a book that I like recommending, but I also feel held back recommending because this book, The Freud Reader by Peter Gay, it can be overwhelming. It has a lot of readings of Freud, a lot of writings of Freud, but the issue that I have faced with this personally is that although it does include a lot of them, it misses out on the full paper. Oftentimes, it is paper cut by Peter Gay, or he has included specific iterations of the paper rather than the newest ones, because I do not know if he's biased against Freud or not, but there is a certain hint of it specifically in this work of Peter Gay's. So, although I recommend reading it, it can get overwhelming. Rather, if you want to start out with reading Freud, I think a much better place to start out, like I suggested earlier, is of course Psychopathology of Everyday Life. But if you want a more expository and more voluminous collection of papers, you could start out with the Essentials of Sigmund Freud, or Essentials of Psychoanalysis rather, it is called, published by Vintage. And that volume is edited well. It includes not so many papers as this one, but it does include the full paper in there, and it will give you a good idea of where Freud was coming from because it includes the full papers and the latest editions of them. The only drawback is, again, it is not the James Strachey translations, neither is this one, neither is the one in Penguin Freud Reader, right? But once you go through either this or the Essentials of Psychoanalysis or the Penguin Freud Reader, all of which are comparably good books, you get into real theory. You get into Freud's magnum opus. Seriously, you need to read the interpretation of dreams if you want to understand where this theory came from, right? How dreams became the gateway to the unconscious, and how Freud leveraged his own unconscious mind, his own dreams, to analyze what is going on in himself, right? And I have a lot of annotations in my copy because I have read this time and time again, at least 4 times so far, because you need to keep returning to this. This is not a book that you read once and it's done. And it will always have something new to offer to you. This is a great book that I would always recommend to anybody wanting to read Freud, even though it is filled with jargon, it is filled with complexity. You cannot really remember everything in it, and you're not supposed to, because this is what this book is for, to return to again and again. Next up, I will recommend somebody very specific, not a new Freudian, because she agreed with a lot of theories of Freud. She just made her own school of psychoanalysis. That is somebody who was analyzed by Sandor Ferenczi, who was motivated into analyzing children, how their unconscious works, and she really gave us the theories of paranoia and schizoid mechanisms and depressive, and on the other hand manic depressive mechanisms, the positions as we call them. These are the first and last of the collected works of Melanie Klein. The first one is, of course, Love, Guilt, and Reparation. This is a collection of his first few works, not few actually. This is a quite voluminous book as well. It can be a little dense to get around to reading, and it is very difficult to read because she has a new way of thinking about how the unconscious functions. Not new in the sense that she tries to demolish the structural theory of Freud or the topographic model of Freud, but rather that she gives those very aspects of the unconscious new functions and new ways of thinking about what their functioning is like, especially when a child is growing up. Additionally, I would also recommend Psychoanalysis of Children, because if you want to really start out reading what Melanie Klein is trying to expose in her books here, you need to know what methodology she used, right? Because Anna Freud, on the other hand, was also into child analysis, but her ideas differ largely from Melanie Klein's idea, precisely because even though they went about doing the same thing, they found different results, and her methods, Melanie Klein's methods, are more out there in the light of day in the form of the volume that I just talked about, the Psychoanalysis of Children, and that is actually the first volume I read, and it was pretty good. It was shocking, it was revelatory, it was something that is not easy to digest for most people, I imagine. But if you're interested in psychoanalysis, most things are not easy to digest, right? Anyways, so this is the first volume and this is the last volume. This is Envy and Gratitude and Other Works. These are published under as collected works by Vintage, and pretty interesting books, to be honest, pretty revelatory. You again will be shocked, will be surprised, will have new perspectives on envy and gratitude and love, remorse and reparation, as Dr. Salman Akhtar would prefer to call it. And moving on, when we talk about Dr. Salman Akhtar, if you don't want to be left feeling like you don't know what a particular word, a particular jargon in any of these books means, this is the book that I would recommend you just go and pick up. And this could be very well be your first book you pick up after any of the others I said, because this includes a plethora of all of the concepts within psychoanalysis. This includes probably the most amount of and most variety of concepts from various schools of psychoanalysis, from object relations theory to Stein's theory to Margaret Mahler's theory, so on and so forth. You could get into it, and this includes a lot of them. Mine is a signed copy that I got signed last year, and this is pretty cool to have. This is just a great book to return to every time you're confused about what a particular word means, and you will not be disappointed by this volume. Alternatively, you could also go for The Language of Psychoanalysis by Laplanche Pontalis. You could also go for another volume by the name of A Critical Dictionary of Psychoanalysis. A dictionary is just a good thing to have when you're starting out and exploring what includes concepts of psychoanalysis, what they really mean, what you might misunderstand while reading Klein, Kohut, anybody, right? This includes a lot of those, and any dictionary for that matter might include. This is the most recent one, so I imagine the most updated version of the dictionaries of psychoanalysis. There is also a Lacanian dictionary to psychoanalysis if you want to get into that specific school of thought. There is also a Kleinian dictionary of psychoanalysis, and so on and so forth. This tries to bring together all of those schools in one volume. So if you like this video, let me know. And if you want more book recommendations for advanced levels, I do have those, but these are the books that I would recommend anybody to start out with. See you next time.